Evil Eye Dragon Omniagruzio is a deck that came out in set 12. It was first released there, and it immediately, in that same set, got a masked form. So of course, this is a masked deck. Evil Eye Omniagruzio itself has 2 skills. It says whenever it is placed on Vanguard Circle, you can look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 card with Omniagruzio in its card name, or up to 1 mask of Hidragoon from among them, reveal it and put it to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. So it makes the deck extremely consistent on every ride. Then it also has the main skill here that says act on Vanguard Circle, you Soul Blast 1. Choose up to 1 trigger unit from your drop, bind it, and until the end of your turn, your opponent cannot increase power with trigger effects of cards with the same trigger icon as the card in your bind zone. So that is to say, if you have a heal trigger bound, if your opponent checks a heal, they cannot get any power from that heal. They can still activate the effect of the heals, but they cannot get power from the heal. Likewise, if you bind a crit and also a heal in your bind zone, your opponent can then not get power from a crit or a heal. It is cumulative, but it is an effect you have to activate every single turn. The masked version of this card has an additional caveat to it. So, it has the skill where, act on Vanguard Circle, you can remove a card with Omniagruzio in its card name with a different name from this card from hand, soul, or drop. Choose up to 1 trigger from your drop and bind it, and this gets the continuous skill that all of your opponent's cards with the same trigger icon as any cards in your bind zone get minus 5k shield. Also, they do not get power from those triggers with the same icon. So once again, if you have a heal trigger bound by this effect, your opponent will not be able to get power from this heal if they damage check it. But in addition, now if they were to try and use this heal trigger to guard, it's going to lose 5k shield. If you have a crit and a heal bound, they lose both 5k shield, and your opponent does not get power whenever they damage check this. So of course only active on your turn. It doesn't do anything when your opponent is taking their turn. Lastly, the masked version here has a skill that says at the end of the battle this unit attack, you may counterblast 1 and put 2 back row rear guards into your soul. Specifically back row, specifically 2 of them, to restand this unit, and it gets drive -1 to the end of the turn. This is a deck that forces your opponent to think differently, especially when it comes to their guarding options and their guarding patterns. Here's the list. Let's jump into this deck profile. Starting off with the Rideline, we have the Evil Eye Beast Omnia Kitty here. It doesn't matter what you play in this grade 0 spot. After that, we're going to go into the Evil Eye Beast Omnia Crow. This says act. Once per turn, you can Soul Blast 1, look at the top 5 cards of your deck and choose up to 1 Omniagruzio, that's grade 3 or greater, from among them added to your hand. This is for either the original version or the mass version. If you did not add something to your hand, you Soul Charge 2. This is extremely good for one thing out your deck, but also helping you be consistent in getting the Omniagruzios that you need for either Persona Ride or for the skill of the Omniagruzio mask. Next up here for the grade 2, we have the Evil Eye Beast Omnia Owls. Omnia Owls says that when this is placed by riding from the Crow, you can search your deck for up to 1 trigger unit, put it into your soul, shuffle your deck, and if you did so, you draw 1 card. So as you want to get as many different trigger icons bound by the time that you're on your Omniagruzio, you can use this to get something like a draw trigger typically out of your deck so that you can then bind that later on, but also just so you can draw. So it kind of ends up using the effect of the draw anyways, which would have been to draw, and it doesn't make it feel like, you know, wasting a crit or something like that. And finally, of course, we have Omniagruzio. For the grade 3s, we're going to be playing here 3 copies of the original Omniagruzio. You want to play as many of these in your deck just so that it helps you when you use all your effects at search for Omniagruzio, so it allows you to just deck them, but also so you can use it with the mask Omniagruzio, which we're of course here playing 4 copies. We already went over what this does in the intro, but we want to go into this as quickly as possible and get as many triggers bound as quickly as possible so that its restand is as threatening as possible. Lastly, here we have ourselves 4 copies of the Mask of Hidragoon. ONLY says you play this, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose up to 1 unit card with either Dragon Tree or Mask in its card name, and you can add it to your hand, and then shuffle your deck. This specifically says Mask with an S, so you can't add the Mask of Hidrigum. Of course, the Mask of Hidrigum is not a unit, so it doesn't count, but just keep that in mind. But we mainly use this to add the Omniagruzio Mask, but we also do play some of the Dragon Tree cards, so it does help us thin out the deck even more, especially considering that we're a restanding Vanguard deck. It allows us to check triggers way more often, triggers that we can then maybe even bind for Omniagruzio's skill to make it even more difficult for our opponent to guard. But with it being a Mask deck, it's required essentially that we play this, also because of its second skill here that lets us, if we're on a Vanguard that does not have Mask in its card name, we can use this effect from the drop to reveal a grade 3 with Mask in its card name from our hand, write it, and then we can put the Mask here into Soul, and if our opponent's on grade 3 or greater, we can actually activate Persona. So this lets us go into the Mask on the same turn that we ride our grade 3. You want to do this even if you're going first, because you can restand even if you're going first, and you can actually now bind up to 3 or 4 triggers right off from your first grade 3 turn, typically 3. We'll go over that in a bit. This is also really great to play at 4 in your deck because the original Omniagruzio can search this out. So again, you can deck thin very easily with this deck, as you can ride Omniagruzio to then select the Mask of Hidrigum from your top 5 and then play the Mask of Hidrigum to get another card from your top 5. So you have insane deck thinning with this deck. For the grade 2s, we're going to start off with the newest one from set 13. This is the Red Eye of Governing Ruler Lindikia here. Just 2 skills here. First one says that when this unit is placed on rear, if you have a Vanguard with Mask in its card name, you counterblast 1. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Choose up to 1 grade 3 or less unit from among them that's not the same name as this card and call it to rear. Shuffle your deck, and then you can actually choose a trigger from your drop and bind it. So this actually allows us, in combination with the original Omniagruzio skill, the skill of the Mask Omniagruzio, and now Linda here, that gives you 3 triggers in your bind zone in one possible turn. So that's already 3 of the 5 triggers you can actually get bound, which limits your opponent's shield options immensely, especially since typically they play 8 to 7 crits, maybe 3 to 4 draws, and 4 heals. So if you can get those 3, you pretty much shut off 90% of the decks that play that trigger lineup, cut out all of their shield by half almost. The final skill here says that during your turn, if you have 3 or more trigger units, you get 10k power. This doesn't check for different trigger types, and you can vary, as you just said, get 3 of them on your first grade 3 turn. Next we have here 4 copies of the Misery Wing. Misery Wing has 2 skills. During your turn, this gets 5k for each different trigger icon in your bind zone. So this can get a maximum of plus 25k. This is the main attacker in the deck. It also provides a lot of utility because on place, if you have 2 trigger units, different trigger icons in your bind zone, you can Soul Blast 2 to draw 1 card. The Soul Blast is actually pretty useful as well because it allows you to remove Omniagruzio from your soul, as well as the Mask of Hidrigum in case you need to use that next turn. Removing the Omniagruzio from your soul means that you can bind it from your drop instead of having to remove it from your soul, which you might need to use your soul for something else. Of course, drawing a card is really nice, and the fact that we now have Linda means that we can actually get this draw off really easily, because sometimes you had to awkwardly find a way to get the Omniagruzio out of your soul before you can actually play the Misery Wing, and maybe there are some times where you want to try and draw cards before you go ahead and use the rest of your plays. So this is really nice that now we can pretty much use this all the time. It also allows us to get easy access to this, again thanks to Linda, because you can actually call this out and activate its skill on place. We've got here 4 copies of the Black Sky Thunder Quaking Queen Laminia. This has 2 skills. When this is discarded from your hand during a ride phase, you can Soul Blast 1, put this at the bottom of your deck to draw 1 card. This is pretty good just because it allows you to plus even more. This deck does plus pretty well in the early game, but it typically fills up its hand with like grade 3s and stuff that's not really that great. So it does suffer from fake hand during the early mid parts of the game. That being said, this helps you just get your extra pieces in hands as well. The second skill is also really useful, because it says if this is placed from your hand, if you Persona roll this turn, you can counterblast, choose a card from your soul and call it to rear. And then if you did, you can soul charge 1. This is really useful because of course Omniagruzio Mask puts 2 cards from the back row into the soul, so you can very easily use this to call out a card from the soul. Specifically a card that counts as 2 cards when it's put into the soul from the back row with Omniagruzio skill. So it allows us to very easily play this and call it back out while not having to sacrifice power in the front row or anything like that and lose a booster or any of that sort of stuff. Lastly, I have here one copy of the Dragon Tree Wrench Skull Kemida. I mainly play this because it allows me to thin out the deck more of the Maska Hidrogrim, but also it has a skill that says Counterblast 1, Soul Blast 1 on place, place a Dragon Tree marker and insert your deck for the Maska Hidrogrim added to your hand. With Lindica, if there's ever a chance that I just haven't seen the Maska Hidrogrim, I can actually use this from the top 5, try and call Skull Kemida, to then search out the mask as well. But in general, I just have this just to make sure that I always see the mask, because there are times where you just don't see it, especially now that we have an extra 4 cards in the deck. Even with all of the top 5 searching that this deck does, top 5 can always whiff. Looking straight at your deck for one specific card and grabbing it will not miss. For the grade 1s here, I have here 3 copies of the Dragon Tree Wrench Demon Strider. This has 2 skills. The first one says on place you can counterblast 1 and put a Dragon Tree marker on a circle that does not have a Dragon Tree marker. This does come up sometimes because it does give your cards either in the back row or in the front row just a little bit enough power to make it an extra card to guard, especially with the guard restriction in terms of, minusing 5k shield. It makes it a lot harder for your opponent to guard. Because if they're losing 5k shield and you're getting an extra 5k attack on your attacks, then of course that is basically an extra card that they're going to have to use to guard. Then it also says act. If your Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you can Soul Blast 2, choose a grade 1 or less from your soul and call it to rear in the same column as this unit. This unfortunately calls into the same column, but what you can do is you can use this with the other grade 1 that we're about to go over in order to call it out from your soul. Similarly to the Lemme. And that grade 1 is here the amazing Rune Collector here. Rune Collector says that when this is placed, you may soul charge 1. Then it says if it's put into the soul by the skill of your Omniagruzio, it counts as 2 cards. So Omniagruzio Mask says you have to put 2 cards from the back row into your soul to restand. You can just put in 1 Rune Collector and that'll count for both cards, which is why we're playing stuff like the Lemenium and the Whelp that we just went over to pull this out from soul again so we can put it back into soul and only need 1 card. Lastly here, I play 1 copy of the jeweled Purple Jeweled Beast Almethus here. So this says here, whenever you place it on Rear or Guardian, depending on where you put it, you either get to countercharge 1 or you get 15k shield. If you put it on Rear, you countercharge. If you put it on Guardian Circle, you get 15k shield for a total of 20. And you just have to pay the cost of putting 2 cards that were originally in your ride deck from either soul or drop back into your ride deck face up, which is really good because, you do need to counterblast 1 every single turn in order to restand. So this allows you to, for example, if your opponent thinks that they can counterblast deny you, you can go ahead and do this. It also gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of how to guard, so you don't always have to take an attack if you have this in hand. But also the extra shield is really nice, especially considering that on turn 1, you already Soul Blast out your grade 0. On turn 2, if you play the Lumenia, you can Soul Blast out your grade 1, which means they're already out of your soul. So this is actually active on turn 2. If you were to go ahead and, for example, go second or get Bum Rush or anything like that, you can actually have a nice 20k shield for basically free. For the PGs here, we have ourselves 3 copies of the Repelled Melis Dragon plus 1 copy of the Elementia Sanctitude here. The dragons are just PGs. These just say that when you guard with them, you can choose a unit and it doesn't get hit for that battle, so the attack is nullified. But if you have 2 or more cards in your hand, you do have to discard 1. However, if you have 1 or less, you do not have to discard. The Elementia Sanctitude here has essentially the same skill, but it is a blitz order, so it doesn't get played from your hand specifically. So it gets around cards that say if you were to play something from hand, that you have to play 2 or more, or whatever the case may be. This gets around that. But it also says if your opponent has the triple drive ability, then you can play this for free, so you don't have to discard. Otherwise, in every single case, you do have to discard. You also have to be specifically grade 3 or lower to use this. For the trigger lineup, I actually have here a total of 7 critical triggers. They're also vanilla in case you need to play them in the back row. You don't really want a trigger in soul, and the 1k does come up, so you don't really need the in soul crit. we're playing 2 of the effect draw triggers and then 2 of the effect front triggers, because you want to play as many triggers as you can in order to power up your misery wings as high as possible, but cover all of your bases so that you always shut off 5k shield and the damage boost from your opponent. The fronts come in really nicely also, just because they give you that nice extra shield value to offset all of the grade 3s and orders and stuff you play in the deck. And the draw is nice. You play 2 of these just to make sure you always see 1. And then you pretty much always will see the 1 card thanks to the Rideline, but you just want to make sure in case it gets damaged early, you have a chance to get it into your bind zone. Lastly, we play 4 of the normal heal triggers. I might change these for maybe some of the, if you're essentially going second or if your Vanguard's a higher grade than you, heal trigger, just because, you know, we have Luard and Shiranui coming in and they're always going to be in grade 4, and there's also Drag Jewel as well as Bastion, who sometimes go into Bastion Prime, and then there's even Kairi who's getting to support in the lyrical set and maybe in the future, so that might be a good thing to play. However, Omniagruzio is the deck that wants to go first all the time. With the new rule change, you can choose whether you're going first or second if you win the die roll, so you always want to go first, unless of course you're playing one of these stride decks. Then you can, for example, choose to always play these types of heals, and then you'll always have that extra 10k shield or 5k shield essentially. And finally, for the Overtrigger, we are going to be playing here the Wicked Dragon King something or another. You want to play this because it's a restanding Vanguard deck. You want your Vanguard to be as threatening as possible, and of course it having 10k crit for the rest of the game is going to make it very threatening. So there's quite a couple of different options you can actually play in this deck. Due to the nature of Omniagruzio Mask putting in rear guards from field into soul, you can use a lot of the greed-on support actually, such as the Desire Devil Incame, who says if this is put from rear circle into soul by the effect of a Vanguard, you can counterblast 2, have that Vanguard get 5k power and an additional drive to the end of the turn. So this means that your second swing is going to actually be with twin drive again. However, this is counterblast 2, you already have to pay counterblast 1 in order to put this into soul, so it's not super feasible, but you can also use a Desire Devil Guamon. This says if your opponent's ungratefully or greater and this goes into soul from rear guard by the ability of your Vanguard, you can counterblast 1, and for the rest of your turn, if your opponent were to call cards from hand to Garden Circle, they have to call 2 or more. So this means that your Misery Wings and your Lindikas and your Vanguard swing are going to be a lot harder for your opponent to guard. You're already reducing the amount of shield that they can guard with. Now you're asking them to guard with even more cards. However, this might end up being a bit of overkill because you're already minusing the amount of shield that your opponent has, which means they're more than likely already going to do 2 or more to be able to guard your attacks. So might be useful, probably not in my opinion. Bushiroad has been pairing up a lot of decks together to make this sort of pair and give them a single support card that supports both decks. Omniagruzio has been paired up with Alma Jester or Astroya Unica / Baiko, which means you can use some of the upcoming support cards, but also you can use some of the old existing cards actually due to the nature of both decks dealing with binding triggers. So for example, you can use the Klitz Peak Griffin to actually have a 15k attacker and 10k shield if you happen to have at least 1 trigger in your bind zone. You can't use the first effect, but you can have yourself a 10k shield. However, thanks to the Lindica and the Misery Wing already existent, those being your main forms of having offense on rear guards, you don't really need this, but it is a decent little option you can try and play. Another thing you can consider is the Alma Jester Schwartz Spada. This has a skill where if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, you can bind a trigger unit from your soul to have this unit get 10k power to the end of the turn. This of course has the benefit of giving you an 18k booster or attacker if you so wanted to, but more importantly, it allows you to bind a trigger into your bind zone, which means when you activate Omniagruzio's skill, you have an additional trigger that you can remove the power and shield from on your opponent's side. However, this only works going second, so keep that in mind. In the future, we'll actually be getting a promo card that actually supports both Astroya and also Omniagruzio. This card here says at the end of the battle, this unit attacks or boosts if you have an either Alma Jester or Evil Eye Vanguard. You can put this into your soul, look at the top 7 cards, choose up to 1 grade 3 from among them and add them to your hand. Then it says if you have 2 or more trigger units in your bind zone, it gets a plus 10k shield, making it a 15k shield. This is a really nice card because it gives you nice shield value and also allows you to be even more consistent with your ability to just get all of the Omniagruzios or the masks that you need, because it just specifies grade 3 card, not unit or anything like that. The last card I'll talk about is going to be, of course, the Evergreen Tran Spear. I actually used to play this in my build before, but I ended up taking it out for a more consistent option, such as the Mask Searcher. But this has the ability where it's a Regalia, so you can only have one in your deck and only use one Regalia throughout the entire fight. But it's a Blitz order that says you Soul Blast 1, choose a unit and gets 25k power to the end of that battle. Then choose one of your Vanguards and it gets the ability that all of your opponent's units with 100 million or more power get -1 crit. So it's actually an anti-overtrigger card, because if your opponent checks the overtrigger, they won't be able to do any damage with the unit that has the 100 million power. This is just a really nice option because it gives you the shield value that this deck sometimes often lacks due to the fact that it just plays so many cards that just do not have any shield value. In the far future, when we get Divine Set 1, there are actually 2 cards that we can consider playing here, 2 of these Cyclers. There's a double R Cycler that allows you, I think it's Rainbow Juggler, that says if you Persona roll this turn, you can Counter Blast 1, Soul Charge 1, call something out from your soul and give it 10k power. So it's very easy, allows you to cycle out your Rune Collector to use it again to put it in for the cost of Omniagruzio Mask. Plus it'll be a much stronger booster. You can also use it to maybe call out a Misery Wing or something like that that ended up in your soul from your soul charging. Another decent option to play is actually the Psycho card, which you can maybe replace Lemme with, because instead of doing Soul Blast 1 whenever you discard it for your ride, you can instead play Energy Blast 3 to then draw 1. It doesn't go back into your deck, but it also doesn't use the soul. This deck right now doesn't have any way to use energy, so this is not a bad option. It also has the ability that when you Persona Road, you can Counter Blast 1 or Energy Blast 3 in order to Soul Charge 1 and have this unit get boost and 5k power. So it's slightly more useful than Lemme, where often you end up just playing Lemme and putting her in the back row, she does nothing. However, of course, Lemme actually fetches you the Rune Collector, so it's up to you how you want to play that. Let's go ahead and start off with the mulligan. If I had to choose a perfect starting hand, it'd probably look a little something like this, because it has everything that you need in order to play Omniagruzio. So it gives me the Rune Collector that I can use on my first grade 3 turn to instantly get the Restanding Vanguard and not have to use up any more units. I have both Omniagruzios, so I can discard one ride into the other one using the Mask of Hidrogum, which I also have in my hand, and then remove the one that I discarded or the one that's in my soul, but essentially I have access to an Omniagruzio already that I can remove, the base Omniagruzio. And I also have a Lemme that I can use on turn 2 or turn 3 in order to have the discard fodder for that. So this is perfect. You basically want to make sure that you can get all your consistency pieces. If I had to choose to put stuff back, I would always try my best to keep the Omniagruzio Mask, because these other cards you can search out a little bit easier. While it's true that the Omniagruzio Mask you can also search out easier, it hurts a lot more to not have the mask to ride into than it does to not have the Omniagruzio to ride into. For example, the mask is also extremely important, but you have 2 chances to try and get it. 3 if you end up seeing the Mask Searcher, which is pretty good to have in hand, especially if you don't see any of the other stuff. Your attackers in like the Misery Wing or the Lindica, you don't really need this in your starting hand. It's fine if you have it, but you don't really need it. You'll probably end up seeing them later on. If anything, you can keep on to the Lindica, who's a little bit more important because you can Counter Blast 1 bind and then maybe even see another Misery Wing or something else that you can actually call out that turn. It's more important for you to be able to bind your triggers and go into your main Vanguard than it is to actually really get any of your rear guards art in the beginning. And holding on to something like a PG is also not half bad, because of course you don't really have a lot of cards to guard. If you're going second, it's going to be really rough for you to be able to handle your opponent's grade 3 turn sometimes. So PG is nice to have, as well as any other triggers. It's not that bad to keep triggers if you need to. Specifically, either a front or a critical trigger is kind of fine to hold on to. The draws you can come back. You're going to end up using that for your ride deck anyways. And the crits in general, you're going to end up seeing them throughout the course of the game, so you don't have to hold on to them. But the fronts, sometimes if you have them, it's kind of nice to keep a hold of them. Not so much in your mulligan, but maybe afterwards, maybe don't discard that. Keep that just in case you need the extra shield value. Something else I wanted to go over really quickly is, let's say you're going into your grade 2 turn here, and you're going to go ahead and discard maybe Lemme to then ride into the Omnia Owls. You can resolve the skill of Omnia Owls here in order to get a draw trigger from your deck. Ideally, you want to get the draw trigger unless you've already seen draw triggers or something like that, but in the general case, you want to make sure you can get as many triggers as possible. This is the one that, you know, affects you the least getting it put out of the deck, because you get to use the skill of the owl to end up drawing anyway, so it kind of balances out. You want to resolve this before you end up resolving the Lemme, so that this can get to Soul. Then the Lemme is on standby, and you can go ahead and activate this. There are some merits to actually immediately Soul Blasting out the draw trigger you just put in instead of the grade 1, because if there's a situation where you just don't have enough rears to really do anything with, you can end up eventually maybe playing out the Demon Strider in your grade 3 turn and then calling out the grade 1 from the Rideline. So it's nice to just have that option on turn 3 if you need it. So kind of just keep that in mind if like you only have like Strider and a bunch of your other cards that aren't your main attackers, but just like, you know, stuff like this, then maybe keep that in mind just so you have a solid attacker. And maybe even so you have like a back row. Of course, with Strider, it is something that you have to kind of remember is that, let's say you go ahead and use this. Let's say you are on your Omniagruzio mask here, and you play Strider, you do whatever, you Soul Blast 2, and you call out your Misery Wing, or sorry, your Rune Collector. You have to remember that your Omniagruzio mask here, you can only put stuff from the back row. So make sure you either call out the Demon Strider in the front row, or you switch it, but essentially this is how the column has to work. If you do it like this, you're going to need something else here to put back into Soul for this skill. And if you don't have that, you can't actually activate this skill, because it has to be a back row rear guard. So make sure you switch these two. The last thing I'll go over is sort of what the deck is most known for, and is a situation that often happened before Linica in set 13, but in set 12, you would only have 2 triggers bound. What you could end up doing is on your turn 4, after you've gone into your mask and you've done your whole thing, is that you can go ahead and actually re-ride into the original Omniagruzio here. That'll activate the skill here to let you look at the top 5. You can go ahead and, let's say, just add the Omniagruzio mask and then shuffle. Then this goes into your hand, and what you can do is you can go ahead and Soul Blast to use the Vanguard skill of your Omniagruzio to then bind a critical, or a trigger, I should say. So now we have ourselves 3, and then you can go ahead and use, let's say, the Mask of Hijigroom from your drop to then put this into Soul and then ride into Omniagruzio mask again. Then you'll be able to draw 1. You can continue doing this as much as you'd like, so you can ride between the 2 of them, because this actually has a useful on-ride skill that allows you to look at the top 5 for something, and you can use its skill to bind a trigger. So with both of these, you can then use this skill. Let's just say we bind the one that's in Soul to then bind a 4th trigger here. It's going to be our Overtrigger, right? So that allows us to then have 4 triggers. This is basically the only way the deck was able to get this sort of triggers bound before Linica came out, because now Linica can go ahead and, let's pretend this PG is a trigger, you can go ahead and bind a card with Linica instead of having to wait until your next turn to ride. But you know, in case you don't see here, we're only playing 3 in this specific build, and that's just kind of how the deck used to function before, and it's still valid even if after the Linica you can do this to get the last 5, let's say the total 5, the last 2 that you need for the triggers that you need. So it's just a play that I want to go over in case someone wasn't aware. It is something that was shown off in the anime. That's just how it works. And that'll do it for this deck profile. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I still really like Omniagruzio. I'm not sure where the deck can necessarily go from here. A grade 4 version would be kind of interesting, and maybe some more rear guards that help it in the early game. Or I don't think this has the same issue as, let's say, Almajester, where it needs like rear guards that count as triggers or anything like that. But it's a deck that I'm really interested to see where Bushiroad takes it from here. But till then, take care of yourselves and each other, play Vanguard, and have yourselves a damn good one.